What's good YouTube? Welcome to my channel, Lasting Conditioning. Correct to say is that you will not bench 315 unless you have above average genetics. Now, is he correct about this? I will explore a few reasons why he could be and potentially are not. In all my years of training, I've encountered just like 3 or 4 people who have benched 315 without blasting gear. So, let's dive right into it to some reasons why he could be correct or why he's not correct. Alright, reason number 1, we know that genetics do matter and actually do play a major role. You can have just average genetics or maybe slightly above average and take a shit ton of steroids and still not deadlift 600 pounds or 800 pounds. So we know genetics do play a certain role. Now when it comes to benching 315, the reason why I'm held back with saying that you need above average genetics is, let's be honest, how many people are going to train smart for 10 plus years? As a matter of fact, most people are just not going to do that. Or will you be willing to take the bulk far enough and completely disregard your health or how you look to be able to bench 315? I would wager most people are not willing to compromise their mental and physical well-being just to bench 315. So we know these things actually plays a role, and we also know that most people will not be able to stay in the grind for a decade in order to get that 315 bench. So this is the reason why I'm saying I'm held back, because it doesn't take above average genetics to train for 10 years. It takes takes just normal genetics to do so. It takes above average genetics to bench 315 in a few years. If you do that in 2 or 3 years, you definitely have above average genetics, no question about it. But if it takes you 10 years to get to that, you probably have average, maybe even slightly below. But if you manage to do it in a decade, if you're chipping at it year after year and getting closer and closer, that's not above average genetics, that's just hard work. What happens is that most people simply just give up or lose the focus or say something else gets in the way, that they don't put a price on being able to do something like this, or maybe even get that promotion at work that you actually do want, but they can't, they don't actually want to put in the work in order to get it. But they would like to have the promotion, but they don't want it, and that's a big difference. It would be nice to bench 315, but are you willing to put in 10 years of work to do it? Most people are not. Reason number 2, and this is completely my point against Greg, that says you need above average genetics to do it. Like I said before, most people will simply just not do the work. They're just not going to do it because it takes too much time. And most people are not going to start at a good age of, like, say 15 to 20 or so, and then start chipping away for the next 10 years to get to that point. They're not going to be willing to forego certain social events or whatever it might be to get to this point. They're just not going to want to do it. Most people are more than happy to accept current limitations and just be cool with that. And that's perfectly fine. If that's you, awesome, more power to you. However, if you do want a 315 bench and you don't have above average genetics or elite genetics, you're going to have to sacrifice a few things in order to get it. And that could be time with family and friends. It could be that you need to work more hours so you can have more money for food, so you can eat more, so you can get that quicker. There will be sacrifices that has to be made. So the question is getting a 315 bench worth it for you? Do you want to potentially spend a decade doing it, or are you happy with benching less? Alright, part number 3. 315 is a lofty goal for the vast majority of us mere mortals. Except for anyone like Larry Wheels, who probably benched 315 when he was like 5 years old. But that's not most of us. Most of us do need a few more years in the gym, or perhaps even have to get out of the kindergarten before we can bench 315. We're not all freaks. Some people happens to be. Larry Wheels is one of them. And this is one of the major problems, because this is what I said earlier, with the 10 years, most people are just not going to stay consistent. Why? Because it's difficult. It's difficult to keep going day after day after day, do the same thing over and over and over and over for decades. It's very monotonous, it's boring, it sometimes may even be tedious. And this is why people will not stay consistent, because a lot of people have this flashy syndrome where you want something new, shiny, and then you have to want to go for that thing. Whereas if you just want to do a 315 bench and you don't have above average genetics, you just have to slowly chip away, get a little bit better every month, month after month, for several years. And that can be very difficult and not necessarily super motivating either. Point number 4, which is basically the reason why I'm both inclined to agree with Greg and why I'm inclined to be against him. I'm inclined to agree with him because of how few people I have seen bench 315. However, I'm also inclined to disagree just because I know how inconsistent most people are, like we just discussed. People will not stay the path. People just not going to do it. It will simply take too much work for people to stay consistent and doing the same thing over and over and over. If you have to bench 2 or 3 times a week and do a bunch of other things as well in order to get to that, and do that for 10 years, it's going to be very monotonous and not super interesting. And people will simply just quit. So this is why I'm both inclined to agree and disagree, but maybe I'm wrong. Alright, point number 5 and final point. We know that people who go to the gym that happens to be more consistent than others, especially past 5 years, typically tends to have above average genetics. Why? Because it's a lot easier to stay consistent if you can see more progress versus someone else, and like basically doing less or maybe even doing the same. So we know it's more easy to stay consistent when you see more results. The more results that come your way for the same level of effort as someone else, you're going to be more likely to take that same thing and try and push it further. So we know it does play a role in terms of staying consistent simply just because you'll have an easier time. But staying consistent by itself is not necessarily a genetic trait. So we do know it plays a role, but we're not entirely sure how it actually plays a role fully. Last in conditioning, signing out. Thank you for watching.